All right, so let's get started. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the first webinar of 2017-18 from Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce. My name is Manas Dasgupta. I'm the chair of the BCIC ICT committee, and I will be your host for this session. Today, I have Suresh Iyer with me, who will be talking to us about cybersecurity and privacy judgment with an emphasis on the MSME sector. Before we start the session, I would like to give you a brief introduction about BCIC, followed by a brief introduction about Suresh. BCIC, under the presidentship of Pankajam Sridevi, is the apex chamber of commerce in Karnataka, representing various industries in Karnataka, working through interactions, policy advocacy, and thought leadership among government, industry, uh, both public and private, trade commissions, academia, and other chambers. We've got a present membership base of about 675 companies representing various sectors, be it manufacturing, IT, ITES, biotechnology, engineering, consultancy, and a number of others. I would recommend you to visit the website bcic.in or reach out to us directly if you need more information on BCIC. That said, welcoming Suresh, for this as a presenter for today's session. Suresh is a highly accomplished professional, having more than 25 years of experience in the field of IT security, risk management, and privacy spaces. He has served in various CX positions in a number of global organizations, namely Auckland Financials, the last one, Altisource, Aditya Birla, eFunds, and Bank of America, a number of others. And he has provided leadership in areas such as technology risk, operational risk, information security, information technology, data center technologies, to name a few. Um, I was typing down a few things about the webinar while we were waiting. This few points. If you have any question during the presentation, please type the question in the webinar window. You would have a chat window open in your webinar screen. So please type it in there. However, if you want to speak up in the line, please type it in the chat box, and we will specifically open your line to for you to speak. This webinar will also be recorded and will be made available through the BCIC website in a few days. And if you have any feedback about the webinar for us to improve, please write to Secretary General at bcic.org. That mail ID I have also typed in the chat box for your reference. Now it is over to Suresh and enjoy the session. Thank you. Suresh, all yours.
Thank you very much, Manas. Uh, First question: am I audible? I know that you can't say yes or no, but you can type, and I can hear it. I can see it. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks, Soumya. Thanks, Komal. Thanks, Anand. Hanumant Raja. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Great. So, so one that I am able to see whatever you're typing, and I can hear you clearly. When you speak, Manas, I was able to hear you clearly. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, all of you. And as Manas mentioned, it's a great honor for me to come to the BCIC and speak on this. There is there is a long association between some of the colleagues here who have been associated with BCIC and with the Secretary General, Mr. Rajapatnakar, with whom I worked many years back when I was a kid in the corporate side then. Uh, so it's a very special mention for me to to get the honor to speak in front of you all, albeit now virtually. Now that's the way meetings happen. A small bit about myself. I I've spent about 25 years of corporate life, before starting on a consulting venture on my own. I am the CEO for CyRAACS. CyRAACS is acronymized as a Cyber Risk Advisory and Consulting Service, and which provides consulting on the cybersecurity, information security, privacy, technology risk, operational risk, to name a few. On the aspect relating to information security, I have been a CISO for the last about 12 years prior to my current assignment as a CEO. In that capacity, I have been a CISO for Aditya Birla Minax and Altisource and Ocwen before heading global technology risk for Ocwen. Uh, Prior to which I spent about 10 to 12 years on data center technologies, business operations, and so I for me, I hope it interests you too. There's been a paradigm shift in the focus of using the word, cyber security. Uh, and a couple of years back, it used to be called data security, information security. There's this new word cyber that's coming. So now what's in that new word cyber, and how has it changed the dynamics of how how things are working. But before that, I thought I probably can give you a little background about what is the changing threat landscape, and that probably will provide you some level of orientation on how things are being viewed currently. And I've tried to keep this presentation generic, not overtly technical. But if you are technology practitioners who wish to know more about this, please feel to write to me separately, and I will be very happy to engage with you. Not for my consulting, I'm just saying purely from a knowledge sharing perspective. I'll be more than happy to engage and talk more about it on that side. With relating to keep this, I have divided the timings into two sections. One, we talk about the security aspect of it. With that base developed, we build on what's the privacy and what's the context of privacy in India with respect to the Supreme Court judgment and how we have to view things now. So that's the modality of the presentation that I have in so far. With that, so I begin uh, now. So if you are you able to see my screens again? Badri, I see that you are not able to hear. Uh, 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 so is there audio dip in between? Okay, thanks. The cyber threat environment has changed dramatically in the last few years. If and The threat vectors 10 years back and the threat vectors today totally different. The kind of effort and time that's being spent on cybersecurity by big companies today is humongous. It is the technology budget used to be allocated earlier, and a portion of that used to be allocated to security. It's changing now. There is a separate technology budget and a separate security budget that's coming. Now, even before the board now discusses financial risks, they want to know now what is happening on the cybersecurity front. Now, this has become the boardroom discussion now. And now, what's happening? There's a huge component on new technologies that's happening with us. New technologies are completely devastating this. Now bring in the component of IoT. Almost anything and everything can be hacked. Anything and everything is susceptible to risk. Now that dimension was unheard of till a couple of years back. Now, automobiles are getting very heavily technology advanced. Uh, Building management systems are getting heavily technologically advanced, and towards this, they're becoming more internet ready. And as they become internet ready, they're susceptible for attacks, and you have all the risks now, which didn't existed in those domains. The domain of physical security was always left to the security guards. Now it is left. Now you also need to make sure that the building management system needs to now be so smarter. The buildings become smarter are the attacks that's happening. So that's an important element that we see. And then uh, the attacks by itself are happening from state actors themselves. Now, in the Trump election, we heard about Russians snooping on. We heard about many years back. If you've not heard about it, that some of our NIC devices were compromised by Chinese, and so our threat is extremely real, and we have to look at it from a segment that it's see when it's something like this. When an earthquake happens in Japan or Indonesia, we read in newspapers. We read it in a context of we're oblivious to that. Today it's a nice, sunny, pleasant afternoon in Bangalore, and it doesn't affect, right? So now, except that the threat environment is no longer in that, you're no longer in that seismic zone of safety. The seismic zone of safety doesn't exist anywhere in the cyberspace, right? Now, that's the context that's real. And I'm not trying to build in a context of doomsday here. I'm trying to build in a context of reality to you all, and to say that this reality means our awareness towards the threat perceptions have to get real again. That's the first element that I want to bring in here. And the threat environment is increasing. Now, naturally, so the regulatory environment is also changing. The regulatory environment is intensifying big time, and we'll talk more about that. And so, with these three elements, we'll talk about how it affects you, how it impacts you, and what you can do to to uh, to face the situation as it comes to you. All right. So to make it interactive, I'm as part of this presentation, I'm going to take as each vector gets over, I'm going to take a pause for questions. So if you feel like questioning, uh, keep your questions ready, or just raise hands, and Manas can open the questions for you, and that will be after I finish each of the vectors. Now, so the three vectors that I wanted to talk about is you know the technology component, which is the ransomware, phishing, advanced persistence threats, state-sponsored attacks. Now, this is which we spoke about, very, very real components. And on the regulatory front, we spoke about, and we spoke about the new age trends. Okay, now, and each of these will be dwelling more about that in our discussions now. Cyber hackers are increasingly opportunistic. Okay, now what's happening is earlier hacking was a pastime. Now hacking is not pastime. It is a mega business. There is there are people who benefit by hacking. There are people who benefit by saying you can be hacked. Okay, so both are real. Okay, let's understand that. Uh, but let's for the sake of our discussions, let's for a moment actually try and say that for the that you can be hacked, and hence they want a system of vulnerability to exist, right? Now let's assume that's in minuscule, which I can empirically prove to you it is a minuscule component. But for I wanted to let the shadow of doubt not exist. I wanted to say yes, there is a small component of that segment that exists too. But the real threat is actually in there is a group of people, opportunistic people, who want to take your data to make money and monetize it. So the monetization happens in several ways. Monetization happens by taking your data, stealing it, and selling it to somebody. Taking your data, stealing it, and using it for more expert hacking and more targeted hacking. Taking your data, stealing it, and using it for state crimes. Now, this is one segment of hacking, right? Hacking. When I say this, then there are, how does that happen? The exploitation happens through a component of inside and outside. Inside, I would say intentional and unintentional. See, when I say inside, you have developed an application that had an inherent weakness, so there is an exploit that happens from outside. That's an unintentional hacking. Now, you've had your internal disgruntled employee who shares the admin password to somebody outside, and they use that to hack inside. That is intentional. So you have both of these now real. Now, now the opportunistic player is always finding an opportunity to find ways to get into, how can he get into your company data and start uh, uh, this function. Now you may be wondering, now all this is going to happen only in NASA. Why should it happen in my company? And the fact and the data shows that the opportunistic hackers have no mercy to anything. For them, data is data. So irrespective of what happens, you may be a carbon brush provider in a manufacturing sector, but if you have your invoicing details that has the list of customers and their address and their billing cycle and their production data. You suddenly have 500 factory chairmen or the MDs and small company factories data with their bank account straight away available, because that's now available to you because a carbon brush provider had his accounting software completely open, right? And he was a good provider. He provided that information to the top manufacturing companies like TVS and Ford and the top manufacturing companies. And so this was just a small little brush that's going to sit on both sides of the motor, and he was the best supplier to that. And I'm not saying this is a real. I'm just taking an example. And his accounting software was compromised, and look at the plethora of information leakage that's happening as part of it. So I wanted to just highlight that what is the source of information no longer now is relevant. Compromise happens at one place, s- then the hack is very much possible because somebody has your data already because of that, right? Now, the weak link I'm explaining here is the carbon brush manufacturer. The carbon brush manufacturer has a one-room factory, and he has a excellent quality supply. Is one of the best quality provider. And look at what happens. His accounting software is a PC, and that PC is actually not even connected to the internet. But he, what happened was his PC was compromised, and hardware manufacturer came, took his PC for repairs, copied his hard disk into another image, and then replaced his hard disk. And he did not delete that hard disk. And then what he did was, that guy was a PC provider. He connected uh, his uh, his hard disk on the exposed to the net, and he had several bots connecting into his machines, and a plethora of activity happened. And suddenly some 3000 hackers had access to this information because there was a weak link available. So now now what happens, so the real question is, how did this hacking happen? This hacking happened because this person had compromised his information in in a PC that was not protected. And he had a process of sending it out without checking. And that person did not follow the ethics of what is required. And look at the compromise that has happened. Suddenly, somebody has a plethora of information of how this can be misused. So I want this to be, explained in a very clear way, that threat perception is no longer, it's a reality. All right. Sorry for this break. The second component, the vectors that are happening is, you might be hearing that a uh, bank is asking for passwords, and bank sends millions of messages to you. We do not ask for passwords. Do not do that. But social engineering is a real is a big thing, and people fall prey to that. Now, how can it be avoided? There's only one way that it can be avoided. That you simply have to follow some rule book so regularly that it becomes part of your DNA. Uh, so it's like the fire drill, right? So when a fire actually happens, we should know how to walk the path to the path of safety. And how do we walk path of safety? Not when fire actually happens. You walk the path of safety when fire does not happen. Similarly, so when you need to so whenever there is a action that is coming onto you, you have a doubt, you should start practicing it, sir, and then ensure that that system of practice is put into the organization's DNA. These things can be avoided from a social engineering perspective. Now, technology is not the same. Ransomware has somewhere actually taken over the the complete dimension of what was what's the monetization of hacking, right? Now, monetization of hacking is now real. Bitcoins have started. It has become, the technology is. Am I speaking now? There's a flip in the internet for a moment. I'm speaking now. Are you able to hear me? Thank you. Uh, Sorry about this blip and apologize for this. Thank you for the feedback. Uh, Now, so we were. I don't know at what time I got the blip. I got a small beep, and that was when I was talking about bitcoins. Uh, uh, so I'll start from there again. So I was talking about, even though a very minuscule population had actually paid the money, the fact remains is that these threats are now real. Um, Now, this is the component of the threat landscape, right? Now we'll talk about other vectors. Now, uh, if we can pause here for a moment, and probably bring some discussions on the aspects of the technology vector. Uh, Manas, do you think it's possible? Thank you, Manas. So if there are any questions, please raise your hands, and probably um, that'll then Manas can unmute you and you can ask your questions. Sure, Manas, go ahead. Manas, your question is, what key mechanisms a small organizations can take, some of the measures to prevent data security breach in terms of technology. Now, this is a fully loaded question. Okay, so the effects in terms of remediation actually comes from the knowledge what is your exposure, right? So you need to first, at the minimum, conduct where are you in terms of your threat to your current state of security, and then you can define your risk appetite. So for which you need to know what is the perception of your industry to external hacking. Now, if you're having privacy data, you're having uh, highly confidential intellectual data. So, which is the data that you need to protect? And so there are various elements that you need to protect. So you're actually developing a patent, and you're developing very complex formulae and analytics into that. Now that's got nothing to do with what the what your contract specify. But if you lose that data, you lose business. I heard some voice. Manas, you want to repeat that? I suddenly heard a beep of voice.
No, this is fine. So, actually, there's a problem at my host organization organizer account. I cannot speak in that account, so I have just unmuted myself from another account in another laptop. So, you please go on. Thank you.
Thanks, Manas. I didn't hear you speak, so I read the question from the chat and started answering. Uh, so we were talking about the first you need to understand where you are in terms of what is the data that you need to protect and how susceptible. Then you can do an analysis on that vector to see if you are having uh, do you need to have an internet facing data that's coming all the way from outside to inside? Do you need to protect all that kind of things? Do you want a firewall to actually have a completely static map saying this port, this time, this period, this source IP, this destination IP, I'm going to open it, everything else blocked? Because it's very, very important if you're having very, very confidential information. But then there could be other people who are actually providing a very different kind of uh, very different kind of who are providing search from the internet and providing a call center service on the phone. So they're just calling up, somebody's calling up, said, can you tell me what is this? Something like an yellow pages. Now, what is it that the data that they're collecting that needs to be protected? It's the caller information that needs to be protected. I don't want anyone to know that Suresh Iyer wanted to know which is, the dyeing machine that's available or which is the slimming machine available, because that's something that's extremely private to me and the Yellow Pages guy. But that information of what all that he has searched, how what needs to be protected can be very well defined there, and then basis which you need to know how you can protect. So I would say you should take a very data centric approach to applying that. And once you have that this is the limited scope of information that you need to protect, then you must apply a full force methodology to contain, to prevent everything that's possible in that space. So there are four-step process. You must adopt what is, you must adopt the median that's in terms of cost, time, and effort angle to see what is the best effort there. For uh, with respect to the important element on what can be prevented, because that's what you should have in place ideally. If you can't have it prevented, then you must have what is called detected. Then if you have it detected, that's not sufficient. You also need to have what you can, you know. So if you have it detected, great, because once you detect, then you can start acting on it. But if you are not able to detect, but you should at least have what is called a monitoring mechanism, a monitor mechanism to find out how it can be, whether you see anomalies in the network of a hacking, and then you react accordingly. Then you need to have an incident response process of how to respond to that situation. And the response can be, again, to how can you stop it, and then how can you contain further exposures, that I limit my exposures. And then finally, how you need to do an analysis of what happened, how you can prevent it at the first place. So this circuitous loop has to be maintained in your mechanism, and that's defined by many standards like ISO 27001. And depending on your industry needs, whether it is banking, then your RBI needs are specific. Then depending on the country of where you are working, if you are working for a US client, the number of US regulations are added to that. So that will define what kind of controls you need to have. But at the minimum, at the very, very minimum, you need to have a cybersecurity monitoring program for your organization if you have your data available for people outside to have you inside. And that is a threat to and any compromise of data, if it means that is compromised to your organization, then it naturally means you need to develop a program of cybersecurity monitoring in place. That will define what you can monitor, what. So, did that answer your question, Manas? Thank you. We'll move to the other sphere of. Again, I heard a beep. All right. We'll move to the other sphere of discussions. That's the regulatory space. Now, now the states have become um very savvy. Uh, 20 years back, uh, the states had mere guidelines in the most advanced countries. And in India, the regulation did not have anything on the information space. As as late as 2007, till the IT Amendment Act came, where there was some reference and reasonable security practices. So the reference that is being used is reasonable security practice. Now, each one interpreted reasonable security practices differently, and RBI came up with separate mandates, cybersecurity guidelines. That's as recent as now. RBI has come up with a very detailed cybersecurity guidelines for banking. IRDA has come up with the details of data protection for insurance, and healthcare organizations, the apex body of that has on medical health records. There are few uh, there are few guidelines. Again, not statutes. Guidelines have been provided from the India front, but in the US space, the regulatory bodies have started taking over. In fact, New York DFS uh, has actually made a very, very detailed mention about how the organization should be structured. They are actually getting into the level of defining who should define security posture, how it should be reported, who is the person who should be sacked. All that has been written in very great detail in DFS cybersecurity guidelines. And then public companies with banking data should file returns according to FFIC. These are things that have been there for long. I think post post the Sarbanes-Oxley era, uh, the minimum controls on data center controls, general controls have been specified, and these have been going for a long time. Now they have been enhanced. Now there are numerous bodies for credit card. There is a PCI. there is for healthcare, there is HIPAA, and these have all taken shape. And in India, there are numerous organizations that are getting certified, and now these are individual statutes. So how do you build that framework? That framework can be built by something that's best defined by the ISO standards. ISO 27001 is a wonderful guideline on that. It's a beautiful security framework. If adopted, actually can be your building block for building any compliance program across that setup. So that's something that can be your basis laying stone. But I wanted to mention that the ISO can be your building block. Now, 5 years back, you have ISO, it was a differentiator. Now, if you have ISO, it's not a differentiator. It is your at, at best your eliminator. You don't have it, then you don't qualify to for many things. Like that, it has become. So you have a good program in place, at least a basic building block in place, is how ISO is now being viewed. In more rightly so, because the threat perception is changing, and hence your requirements from, and the government element has taken a huge upbeat in the last couple of years, because governments were not government were actually viewing all this in a very passive way. When the world was talking to each other uh, on emails 10 years back, you go to a police station and you want to file a FIR, you'll have to still write on paper. And it's only the last couple of years that the electronic form has taken a big shape in all those areas. The vast digitization of everything in the government space, the government has woken up to that and now specifying how data protection has to be there. But even today, there is not a single legislation that talks in great detail in India exhaustively about data protection. No legislation is talking about it. However, there, in case you have a breach and there is a litigation that happens, there are numerous provisions of law basis which the courts can take an interpretation and provide you a penalty, and that is left to the courts to now decide. Because that'll give that. So government has taken cognizance of that, and they've set up uh, committee has been set up to draft a data protection framework. Now this is a very very important milestone for India. Now this will pave way in the way how organizations have to start managing their data. Now, for companies that have a very structured approach, this would not be a problem. But the companies who have actually been on the slightly older technologies, they will have to effectively. It means that they will now have to uh, uh, make use of this guideline to completely overhaul the way they operate. So that's on the regulatory side. And the other dimension that I wanted to bring about is, you know, Gen X, Gen Y, now it's Gen Z, right? Now that's the employee, that's your current employee. He wants to come to office in shorts. He wants to bring his own device. He wants to work from home. He wants a timing that's completely. Now, all the things that were specified as not possible 15 years back, you can't anymore say that because the bulk of the working talent demands this as a minimum requirement. Now, now so let's, for a moment, let's keep, I think some of us who are who have crossed this generation and who are slightly middle aged and find this appalling, pretend for a moment that your opinion doesn't is not important anymore. Uh, your opinion is important provided you can change uh, suiting to their opinion. So just like how Mr. Ford said, I like a color as long as it's black. Yeah, if you change it to their side of thinking, you will be considered acceptable. If you don't, you can't attract the fresh talent anymore. That's again a reality. Now, organizations are just grappling with this. People who have decided work from home are finding it, is this the right thing? They're struggling, there is a lot of things about productivity, but the new age organization now expects that to to happen. Now, look at it from a security point of view. Now, if you have an organization application environment that is susceptible for more leakage in that environment, you're in trouble. Imagine a company which has completely virtualized its applications in the cloud and actually has a very key session based uh, sessions which can be where there is no way data can be copied from one to the other. What happens to them? They are completely ready to they're completely ready to they're completely ready to handle the new age requirements. So it's going to be whether it's going to be BYOD or anything, because the vulnerability of that machine should not be should not be a factor uh, for the susceptibility of your data. So what should you do? So if your application, you should organizations in this space have to start thinking about how do we plan migrating our application and infrastructure environment to ensure that I provide this. And for doing that, you look at what is your current investments in place and what is your return of investments that you expected out of it at the time when you budgeted it. If you had actually budgeted it at the year of 2007 and it has lived its depreciation year, please plan for a technology that will help you sustain for the next few years comfortably. And that's the direction that will help you move in that space. And adoption of IoT. Now, is it something that you can avoid? In a matter of time, whether you like it or not, IoT adoption in every aspect of it is going to become just real. So organizations uh, that have today 0.1% of IoT in the next 3 years will become at least 7 to 8% IoT on their total assets. Now, this means that you have to, as you bring in, so your asset management program should include, as you buy assets, does it have online visibility? What is the data that is there? Then you develop a control environment as part of the acquisition rather than grappling with it when you try to discover it later. So, so if it's easy to do a broad brush approach right now, simply say that I don't have any IoT right now, but if I have an IoT, this is my current control, and you build a control for what you have. Very likely, or very likely that you will end up in a nil database right now. Good for you. But if you have implement that control, but more importantly, you've introduced a wonderful program called the change management program of acquiring any new devices. That will help you clearly make an assessment of your impact to your business while acquiring that product, and you can develop a control mechanism. That's very important. And the Make in India, Startup India has all opened up. Particularly Bangalore is a is a heaven for startup companies, and there are plenty of startup companies that are happening. And the startup companies initially want to go acquire business, build a product. Now they're not focused on anything else, and security is probably last in their consideration. Now this is probably a place where actually, you know, with very small effort, you can actually build a robust program for them and say, take care of your, because you are setting up the companies. You just set up, you devise your risk appetite, define it, and say that I will ensure, suppose an organization is acquiring an application, I'll make sure that the application is tested for its security readiness to be for data leakage. And if it's there ready, then I'll go ahead and deploy the application. And that's good enough right now, because that's sufficient for them to, and then they can develop a overall big program on people, process, technology, and then develop a full security framework as they go along. And that's the place where probably these startup companies are building huge IPRs right along the way. How they should protect their IPs in a way that they are able to maintain what's called their edge over their competition, and they continue to grow. A large component that's coming out new is the third party connections. Uh, Organizations are looking for experts to do everything. So so it's collaboration everywhere. For example, payroll. Very few companies are processing payrolls by themselves. So there is a new generation of payroll processing companies that have come up, right? So payroll is one segment. Now facility management is another segment. uh, IT management is another segment. NOC is another one. SOC, another new age, is on one. These are all targeted SMEs who no longer belong to that organization but work for the organization. Now, the organization earlier they were body shopped provided to that company. Now they are not body shopped. They are contracts that have been established, and a SOC company would say, I service 500 people by I will service from my location. You give me access to your network devices. I will provide you intelligence report. Now this is happening already. Now, if you want to build a program and hire top technicians to do that work, it will cost you 6 times more money, and you will not be able to keep him happy because your environment doesn't provide him the learning opportunities which he will get otherwise there. Now it's the land of experts. So you have to focus on how can you become an expert in the field where you are, and you have to accept the reality of uh, of the experts providing that support from wherever they are. So you build a plan on what is important. How do you build third party collaborations? So build a very robust third party risk management program. What can be outsourced? What cannot be outsourced? look at it from the prism of saying, how can I make it happen rather than saying, how can I not make it happen? As security practitioner, I have been at the brunt of saying no to many things for many, many years, and I have my transformation journey has been now to look at working with business to see how to make that happen and build controls alongside how to make that happen. Then security is no longer a hindrance to business, it becomes an enabler to business. So, with that, I actually complete my section on security. And before I move to privacy, I'd like to stop here and uh, invite for Q&A before we move into the segment of privacy. Meenakshi's question for online service. Meenakshi, would you like to come on the phone? Manas, would it be possible for, or Manas, should I actually go ahead and turn voice on?
Yes,
Meenakshi,
please.
Meenakshi, you can.
So I have turned her voice on. Just one moment. Next, you would get a prompt to accept the enablement. Yeah, I think she's on. You get a prompt, Meenakshi, on your screen to accept. We have enabled your line.
I can see Meenakshi.
And it's telling us waiting for user response.
Okay, she's behind a wall. Thank you. Meenakshi, I will read the question. Okay. For online retail service companies, example of Flipkart or Uber, what would be the percentage of technology OPEX to cybersecurity? Do you envision the cybersecurity costs? I will answer the second question with a simple answer. Yes. Uh, I'm hearing a lot of echo. How is it right now? Thank you. So, yes, the cybersecurity cost is going to increase for sure. But since I don't know what is the security posture of Flipkart or Uber, but I would, I have some idea about how some people in Amazon have been working on the security posture. I have some little idea of how Flipkart has been operating there. I have no idea on how Uber has been doing, but I do know what is the kind of hiring they are trying to do on this space. For sure, one thing, online retail companies have a huge impact with respect to privacy data. It's earlier Uber or Flipkart had had no there was no See, what would happen if somebody had known that I am traveling from Indiranagar to Kormangla at 3 o'clock? Uh, Uber's that data, if it gets compromised, it was just a business data of Uber that was getting compromised. Now it is taking a different turn with privacy. I'll talk more about that in the privacy. Now, if Suresh Iyer says that I don't want Uber to disclose that information, that because what Uber does is Uber would say, here is a user who is actually traveling in the afternoons uh, from from Indiranagar to Kormangla and is traveling back from Kormangla to Indiranagar back at 8 o'clock, then there could be special aid sale that could happen for opportunities that can be explored. So this is what they are trying to use that data for, right? Now this has opened up a plethora of doubts. Now now if Uber for once compromises that data, then Suresh Iyer has the upper hand in suing Uber, saying, why did you do that? Because you did not explicitly take my permission to sell that data in any form of other. Now that becomes very, and hence the protection. Uh, yeah, Uber has individual phone numbers. Yes, in the, now now the component I'm trying to talk about is the privacy element has opened up a lot of controls that now organizations have to do about it. We'll talk about more at the privacy side, but from a cybersecurity point of view, uh, anything that the companies that have been holding uh, data and they are operating where internet is the market, the threats that are increasing on an average is average in increasing on at least 20% to 60% depending on the industry, which means that your cost of technology deployments have to be at least a fraction of that. It can't be a reduced number. Now, what is happening is there is also a good uh, with the cloud adoption that's happening, there is also a good compromise that's getting built across because of the large scale deployments by cloud providers. Cloud providers operate a large security program which are able to compensate for some of these costs at a very high level. So an on-prem solution to cloud is actually bringing a whole lot of reduction in costs. And that will, so from that component, uh, if you see there may be a marginal net off in the increase in OPEX, uh, but uh, uh, but the component of increased cost and security is reality. Did I answer your question, Meenakshi? Any other questions? Narasimha, your question is what kind of security measure by ISP to stop unethical hacking on our networks? What measure guidelines government is taking on ISPs to stop unethical hacking? Uh, See, ISPs actually don't have visibility to your data typically, unless they have what is called as the SSL intercepts, because about 60 to 70% of internet data is encrypted today. So which means anything that is encrypted, they have no visibility to. So what ISPs at the minimum would do is they would do DDoS protection. So if there is a distributed denial of service, then they have an ability to address that aspect of it and provide provide protection, which is called, which otherwise is known as clean pipe. So clean pipe solutions are available, and that's something. There is a component. There are companies like Arbor Networks and others who have tied with Akamai and others who have provided a whole lot of clean pipe solution on the internet space for DDoS protection. But when it comes to your data, how you want to protect your data, the responsibility lies solely with you. Now, what measures government is taking on unethical hacking? The cybersecurity, see the law per se. If somebody has snooped into your data and you can put a cyber FIR and say that this person has snooped in, then that process of legal this one is very much valid. But what is government doing to stop? Nothing. Government is doing nothing to stop it. At least not that I'm aware of anything. Has government given any guidelines? No. Government typically doesn't give guidelines for anybody saying how not to steal. So let's assume for a minute government is not going to do on that front. You already used the word unethical. Now now the word unethical has a very thin line here. Now I'll talk about it. I'm very compelled to talk about this on the digital footprints here. Your child puts a photograph saying, I went to this cinema, and in Facebook. And in Facebook, the person has put, my profile can be read by anybody. Now, what happens it now is that data that your child, which is, who is 12 years or 15 years or 17 years old, has gone to this movie and enjoying this, or providing that content is now available on a digital footprint to the world. Now, which means unscrupulous elements have an ability to start viewing it. Now, this is what Justice, uh, what's his name? Not Chandrachud. I know I can't remember. Justice Kishan. Uh, he has mentioned about this in the judgment in a little more elaborate data, saying how government should come up with guidelines for social media. So this is happening, in one way or other. That courts have taken cognizance of this and started to direct the governments for legislation. Legislations currently don't exist, guidelines don't exist. Narasimha, did that answer your question? All right. Any other questions? Okay, we will move on to one uh, very interesting subject, which is privacy. Uh, Privacy. Uh, so, see from a security practitioner's viewpoint, from a technical viewpoint, privacy protection and security protection is no different. The controls that you need to do, adopt, everything else remain the same. The only thing is privacy data gives you, it is a form of a data treatment to ensure that this data now becomes, for example, if you have a classification of data at data levels of low and high in terms of importance. Now this classification of whether this is a privacy data or not automatically becomes important for you to make it at the highest level of protection. That is all that it gives you from a technical practitioner's point. Now, the technical practitioner's viewpoint, it doesn't matter. A firewall will continue to do the same thing for your confidential information as well as privacy information, no difference. Encryption in the applications need to be done that way. But there is a bigger element now this new judgment has broken about. Till now, a date, till now privacy was always viewed as a, privacy leakage was viewed as an aberration, and it was, they were looking at legislative frameworks to provide whether or not it is a cognizable offense and things like that. Now it has actually taken a very different viewpoint. The court has said that privacy is a fundamental right. Now, fundamental right means that it, no matter what, if there is a conflicting, if there is a conflicting data with respect to, with respect to, with respect to uh, example that this can be treated, you can do this, you can send this information. All that has been detailed in one particular legislation, and that now comes up for scrutiny as a privacy data. And the privacy, the Constitution overrules it, says it privacy data cannot be compromised. Simple. It's now a fundamental right. Now it has made sure that organizations now holding any data that is private for the individual has now to be protected. Period. So the very small organizations holding employee data now is under the ambit and scrutiny of the law, that they have to ensure that data is protected. No, I had it under a lock and key. It got stolen. But if the adequate protection was not there, it is up to that employer now to go and prove that adequate protection was there. Similarly, now electronic footprint also follows the same way. If you have employee data that is kept in your electronic systems, those electronic systems must have adequate protection. That adequate protection needs to be amply cleared by ways of best practices currently. There are no legislations that articulate that. Justice Chandrachud and his bench of jury who have opined on that, there are number of interpretations where they are asking the government to develop, draft, and legislate this function. So, what has happened now? So, across the world, it's not that we did not have, we were, as India being a very large outsourcing hub, a very large component of players in the technology space as well as the business processing space have been exposed to this privacy element of it, because if they were servicing US customers, they were actually needing to comply to some of all those regulations, and those were coming up. Now, GDPR has come up new. GDPR has opened up a very big thing now. By May 2018, every organization having any European data must develop a program and provide attestation of compliance by May 2018. Now, this has been made mandatory. Now, this has been made a law. Now, organizations having EU data are clapping now to say, how do we actually start doing GDPR compliance? And As a consultant, I'm happy because I'm getting number of inquiries in that, and it's one side of the coin. But it is no longer small, large enterprises. Everybody who has access to this has happened. Now, a very similar framework is very likely to come in India. Very, very likely to come in India. In fact, Justice Kishan, he had Justice, Justice Cole is his name. I'm trying to get the full name of the. I'm trying to get the full name of the. Sanjay Kishan Kaul. I'm sorry, I didn't have that data in front of me earlier. So Sanjay Kishan Kauls has a 46-page judgment, and if I urge you to go and read it, he, amongst the various jury, is the only person who has addressed the information aspect of and the technology aspect of it, and saying, and he is urging the government through this judgment to actually start coming up with legislations and things like that. Now, this is a big thing. Um, so the committee has been set up to draft. All that has happened. Now, what's happening is, uh, so let us break this into simple terms. What is it that organization should do now? You should be now having a clarity that any data that belongs to the private domain of that individual needs to be protected. And if you are collecting that data because you are needing to have that obligation to collect it, then you should have adequate means to say why you have collected it. If it is required for him to employ with you and you need that information, it is required. You need his date of birth to ensure a few components. You need his education to confirm a few components. You need his address to confirm a few components. You need his data. You need his blood group to have some you can collect whatever information, but you need to have a very clear way why you are collecting. I'm only talking about employee right now, but let's view it beyond. Now you are actually performing some data for somebody. You are collecting some data that's a privacy record of your client. Now you are processing that data as part of your business process. Now it is all the more important that you protect that privacy data in accordance to the law again, because it doesn't matter whether you are collecting it directly from the final individual, or you are collecting it from the company that is providing you that data. Your obligation remains. Now, the extent of damage that happens is you are the if you on a breach, you become the culprit one if you are holding your own employees' data. You become culprit two if you are holding it for somebody. That's it. But the damage doesn't change. So, what is it that organizations need to do? So, my simple definition would be organizations, irrespective of their size, need to simply accord a methodology of performing what is called a PIA, a privacy impact assessment. Now, just like how an annual budget is created and presented to board, just like how uh, a, a sales pipeline is prepared and presented to board, just like how the top risks of the company is presented to board, the privacy impact assessments have to be conducted and presented to board. the apex body of the governance of the company should now be having an intimate knowledge of what is the privacy data that they are holding and what is the privacy impact that they are having. So, which means that you may be currently giving your employee records for payroll processing, or uh, you may actually be giving your employee records to your bank, saying these people are having this, and you are giving it to one, direct, DSA, direct selling agent of the bank to come and sell value addition products. As a, you may be doing it as a simple enhancement to your, but if you are giving, here is the name of the person and here is the telephone number, you can contact them. You can't do that anymore. You have to do it after taking the employee's consent. Can I give your data to somebody? Because if that person says, I didn't authorize you to do this, then it becomes big. Then it becomes a very big thing. Then it becomes you have to now explain why you had to do that without his consent, because it's fundamental right now. So so privacy impact assessments could be on the complete privacy data life cycle of your input, process and output cycles. You could be taking in some data from employees or from your customers, holding that. You could be doing it as part of your business process. You could be sending out information whether it has privacy data. In all these elements, you should have controls built in. The controls that need to be built in are have to be in elaborate terms with respect to uh, whether or not this constitutes a privacy data, whether or not these controls are required or not. All right. So that's the key element, and in fact, watch out for more from my space and in my website, which is not ready yet, but in about a month's time, I will be publishing a white paper on the PIA framework, which is nearly ready right now. We're just making final touches to that in terms of. So organization which wants to just benefit just by having a look at that framework, we will provide you, or I can actually, as a matter of courtesy, I can provide that to Manas, who can onward forward it to people who want it. I can do that as well. That's just a framework for you to adopt on what to be done on the PIA level. More if they want elaborate PIAs, then then companies like us and many other consultants are there. You can call them and then specifically get this done. Get this done by yourself along with them, so you become intimately aware that this is being done, and so it as an ongoing practice. This is something that I thought will be very important for organizations like you. I With the last 4 minutes, I'll ask for questions and ask for a feedback. And I pause right now for questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please type it in the chat now, or if you want to speak on the line, please let us know. We will open your line.
Siddharth Nair, your question is how will at present the current India data processors who process EU data for data controllers be able to comply with GDPR, knowing that there are no stringent data protection laws in India? Uh, my personal view in this is it is agnostic to what data protection laws in India are for ensuring GDPR compliance. GDPR compliance is limited to the EU data and how you process that data and how you are treating that data from the data controller to the data processor. And irrespective of that, you need to have privacy by design and the all elements of GDPR built into that process. Now that will bring in, that will bring in an element of of completeness to the GDPR to the GDPR program that that company which is processing is having. And and GDPR has mechanisms with relating to consent mechanism, transparency. There is an element of end-to-end security, data protection, impact assessment, privacy design, appointment, and the role of a data protection officer. These are things that have been elaborately mentioned in each of the articles of GDPR. And if they go through that process, irrespective of whether an Indian law is available or not, it doesn't matter. It is that processing unit that is processing EU data that needs to be compliant to that. That's my limited view on that.
Any other question?
I see Siddharth having a follow-up.
Siddharth having a follow-up.
All right. Okay. Thanks,
All
Siddharth.
right. Okay. Thanks, Siddharth.
Komal Goyal is
Goyal is
having a question. She's
having a
typing.
question. She's typing.
I don't know he or she. I'm sorry.
He or she, I'm sorry.
So, Suresh, we've got a couple of more questions.
Yes, Komal.
Yes,
The
Omar.
answer is
The
yes.
answer is
Uh, uh,
uh,
if you are
if you are
taking personal data, you definitely
you
need
definitely
consent.
need.
Soumya's question is: the banks have regulation over PII. Why don't these e-commerce company be regulated under the same policies? Uh, RBI cybersecurity guidelines. See, there are two things. PCI is is not a government regulation. PCI is a industry body that has come up and said PCI data security standards. They built in a standard. Now the companies can adopt that standard to say I am certifying myself to PCI. That's a standard that's come up. Now it's a different. Now RBI hasn't said you are PCI compliant and you will be obligated from that. RBI said in addition to whatever PCI DSS 3 is saying, you additionally or you need to now comply with my guidelines. That is what RBI's mandate is. And it has not just said it to banks, it has said it to NBFCs too. So now the regulation has now suddenly increased its manifold, and it has given a timeline for May. I think June 2017 to comply. So there is a whole lot of work that's happening on that space right now. Now, with respect to uh, with respect to so it is a circular that has come through. Government legislations have still not happened, and that is now happening. My expectation is before the elections of 2019, we will have a full framework and it will be enacted as a law and passed in parliament. This will happen in this government term. I know I'm not making a political statement. I'm making a very simple, intelligent statement from whatever we have gathered so far. It is likely to happen. That will bring in a whole lot of dynamics into the way companies operate with privacy data and with personal data. In hospitality industries, we have upload of his detailed guidance on foreign registration. Will this be a breach of privacy? If they are collecting the data and presenting it as a need to be supplied outside uh, for their business convenience and not as a and that doesn't contain the necessary consent mechanism, then it is breach of privacy. Your number is private to you. There is the Department of Telecommunication has brought in a regulation already in that, along with TRAI, and the TRAI has said that do not uh, disturb. D&D is a facility that is available. So I think 1909, if you dial from your current operator, you go and specify that you are not. But you diligently have to do one more thing. As and when you get a complaint, you have to complain into their website. I got this complaint. Because I know this process works. Any telemarketing company that is sending a call to you, if it is actually sending that call to you with and you are a DND number, what can happen is if persist they get more than 6 complaints, they can actually de-license that provider. This is a so we need you just need to make sure that it is you need to follow through this. It is as good as there is a traffic light and there is nobody following rules. So what can I do about it? So we need to complain and make sure that this process happens as a as a citizen. My on my duty, if I get a DND call, I go and complain, and I can tell you, I receive none. Yes, you have to. If you log the complaint, it and you have your supreme right to privacy there, and this has not happened after the Supreme Court ruling. This has happened much before DND. This happened way back when Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister.
So we are out of time. Is there any other question that you have?
Siddharth, your question is, I just relate, is there any law or statute in any in jurisdictions which defines personal data as in many European jurisdictions, even encrypted more or MSS ID or mobile number is a personal data? I think personal data being defined as a fundamental right has now come in with this new judgment. So if anybody is collecting any data of your data of anybody, any individual that's private in nature, that that needs to be protected no matter what. It cannot be simply collected for the sake of collecting. It cannot be preserved for the sake of preserving. It cannot be processed for the sake of processing. It needs a legitimate need and a consent mechanism for that to happen. Now, are there legislations in that way? No, legislations have not been drafted. The legislations have to follow. My expectation is these legislations will happen in the next few months, and it will get better. But the supremacy of the privacy data being a fundamental right has now taken a very important dimension to the way now government, companies, and individuals now have to react to this. All right. So, any other questions?
Yeah.
Nothing. Over to you, Manas.
Yeah, thank you. In the interest of time, let's note we are already over our time limit. So, Suresh, on behalf of BCIC and audience who have come together to listen to you, a big thank you. It's been an excellent session from yourself. I'm sure the audience got benefited quite a bit. I myself especially enjoyed the very good quality questions coming from a lot of the audience and your inputs to that. Thank you for that, Suresh. For the audience, Suresh is available on mail at suresh.iyer@cyracs.com. I will type it in the chat window just after this, so you can take a note, and if you want to discuss anything with Suresh, you can drop him a note, so which is okay. And again, thank you everyone. Yeah, so thanks Suresh for the mail ID in the chat box. Again, thank you everyone for joining. I hope you all enjoyed it. Once again, we have recorded the session and we will post it on the BCIC website shortly. So if you want to view that again, most welcome. Thank you, and we will close our call here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to this audience, and I enjoyed this session. Thanks, Manas, and thanks, BCIC, for this great opportunity. Bye, everyone, for now.
Thank you.